The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour diner flickered as Sarah Vaughn pressed a cold paper napkin against her bleeding lip, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold it steady. She had run 6 blocks in the rain, her sweater torn at the collar, mascara streaming down her cheeks in dark rivers that she kept wiping away with the back of her hand. The kind-faced waitress had taken one look at her stumbling through the door and immediately brought her water and ice without asking questions, the sympathy in her eyes almost harder to bear than the physical pain. "You need me to call the police, honey?" the waitress asked quietly, refilling Sarah's water glass. Sarah shook her head quickly, fear tightening her chest. No, he would just talk his way out of it. He always does. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated herself for the weakness, for the 3 years she had wasted on Marcus, for believing his apologies and his promises that he would change. Tonight had been the final straw when he had shoved her against the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame down. All because she had suggested they spend the holidays with her parents instead of his drinking buddies. The diner door opened with a soft chime, and Sarah tensed instinctively, her heart racing until she saw it was not Marcus but a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit, rain droplets clinging to his dark hair. He looked completely out of place in the shabby diner with its cracked vinyl seats and sticky tables, like he had stepped out of a business magazine and wandered into the wrong neighborhood. His eyes swept the nearly empty restaurant and landed on her for just a moment, his expression shifting from distraction to concern so quickly she almost missed it. Winston Quade had been driving home from a late business dinner when he spotted the diner, his stomach reminding him he had barely touched his overpriced salmon. He had built his commercial real estate empire from nothing, working construction jobs during the day and taking business classes at night. And despite now having more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, he still preferred hole-in-the-wall diners to 5-star restaurants. But the moment he walked in and saw the young woman at the corner booth with blood on her lip and terror in her eyes, food was the last thing on his mind. He ordered coffee at the counter, paying far more attention to the woman's reflection in the window than to the waitress taking his order. She was beautiful even in her distress, with long auburn hair and delicate features, but it was the haunted look in her green eyes that made his protective instincts flare to life. He had seen that look before on his younger sister's face, years ago, before he had convinced her to leave the man who had been hurting her. The door burst open again, and this time Sarah's sharp intake of breath told Winston everything he needed to know. A man in his late 20s stormed in, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both, his eyes scanning the diner until they locked onto Sarah. "There you are," Marcus snarled, his voice loud enough to make the only other customer look up from his newspaper. "Do you have any idea how stupid you made me look, running off like that? Get up, we're going home." Sarah shrank back against the booth, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you. The hell you aren't." Marcus grabbed her arm and yanked her halfway out of her seat, and that was when Winston moved. He crossed the diner in 4 long strides and caught Marcus's wrist in an iron grip, his voice deadly calm. "Let her go." Marcus spun around, fury contorting his features. "Who the hell are you?" "This is between me and my girlfriend, so back off before you get hurt." Winston did not release his grip, his dark eyes cold and assessing. He had 6 inches and at least 40 pounds of muscle on this guy, and from the way Marcus swayed slightly, he was drunk enough to make poor decisions. "I'm the person telling you to let her go and walk out that door. Right now." "Or what?" Marcus sneered, trying to jerk his arm free and failing. "You think you can just swoop in and play hero, Sarah, tell this asshole to mind his own business." Sarah stood frozen, caught between terror and hope, her arm aching where Marcus's fingers had dug in. She had never seen anyone stand up to Marcus like this, had never imagined anyone would bother to intervene in what everyone else called a domestic dispute. Winston's jaw tightened. Final warning. "Let go of her and leave, or I call the police and press charges for assault. And trust me, I have lawyers who would love to make this case." Something in Winston's tone must have penetrated Marcus's alcohol-soaked brain because he finally released Sarah's arm, stumbling back a step. But his eyes were full of venom as he pointed at her. "This isn't over, Sarah. You think you can just leave me? You're nothing without me. Nobody else is ever going to want you." "Get out," Winston said, his voice dropping lower, and there was something in his stance that made even the belligerent Marcus take another step back. "And if you come near her again, you'll regret it." Marcus cursed under his breath but headed for the door, turning back only to spit out, "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. You'll come crawling back. You always do." The door slammed behind him, and the silence that followed felt deafening. Sarah sank back into the booth, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight, adrenaline making her shake even harder than before. She looked up at the stranger who had just faced down Marcus without flinching, this man in his expensive suit who had absolutely no reason to get involved in her mess. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You didn't have to do that." Winston slid into the booth across from her without asking permission, his expression softening. "Yes, I did. Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Sarah touched her lip gingerly and shook her head. "It's not that bad. It looks worse than it is." She paused, studying him more carefully now that the immediate danger had passed. He was probably in his early 30s, with strong features and watchful eyes that suggested he did not miss much. His suit alone probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I'm Sarah. Winston." He signaled the waitress and ordered tea and soup without consulting Sarah, then turned back to her with calm authority. "When was the last time you ate?" "I don't remember," she admitted. She had been too nervous during dinner at Marcus's apartment, walking on eggshells as usual, trying not to say anything that would set him off. Fat lot of good that had done her. "You're going to eat something, and then we're going to figure out your situation," Winston said, not unkindly but with the sort of decisive tone that suggested he was used to solving problems. "Where were you planning to go tonight?" Sarah bit her lip, then winced at the pain. "I don't know. I can't go back to the apartment. It's in his name and all my stuff is there, but I can't face him again tonight. Maybe I could find a hotel or something." Even as she said it, she was calculating the dismal balance in her checking account and wondering how long she could afford even the cheapest motel. "Do you have family in the city?" "My parents live upstate, about 4 hours away." She twisted her napkin between her fingers. "I could call them, but it's almost midnight and my mom worries, and I just can't deal with all the questions right now about how I let things get this bad." Winston was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. When the food arrived, he pushed the bowl of soup toward her and waited until she started eating before he spoke again. "I have a proposition for you. I own a residential building about 20 minutes from here. There's a furnished apartment on the 10th floor that's between tenants right now. You can stay there tonight, get some sleep, and figure out your next move in the morning when you're thinking clearly." Sarah froze with the spoon halfway to her mouth, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Because someone helped my sister when she needed it, and I've never forgotten that kindness." His voice was steady and honest. "And because no one should have to go back to someone who hurts them. I'm not expecting anything from you, Sarah, just giving you a safe place to sleep tonight." She searched his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motives, but all she saw was genuine concern. Maybe she was being naive. Maybe this was another terrible decision in a long line of them, but something about Winston made her feel safer than she had in months. "Okay, thank you." 20 minutes later, Sarah was following Winston through the marble lobby of a stunning apartment complex, feeling completely out of place in her torn sweater and rain-soaked jeans. The night, doorman greeted Winston by name with obvious respect, barely blinking at Sarah's disheveled appearance. The elevator was all gleaming brass and mirrors, and Sarah avoided looking at her reflection, not wanting to see the evidence of her disaster of an evening. The apartment Winston unlocked on the 10th floor was nothing like the cramped studio she had shared with Marcus. It was spacious and modern with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, furnished in soft grays and creams that looked straight out of a design magazine. Sarah stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the luxury and by the surreal turn her night had taken. "The bedroom is through there," Winston said, gesturing down a short hallway. "Bathroom has toiletries and clean towels. The kitchen is stocked with basics. Make yourself at home." "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said quietly. "This is incredibly generous." Winston pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on the entry table. "My personal number is on there. Call me if you need anything or if that guy shows up somehow. The building has excellent security, but I want you to feel safe." He paused at the door, his expression serious. "And Sarah, don't go back to him. Whatever he's told you, whatever excuses he's made, it doesn't get better. It only gets worse." She nodded, tears suddenly burning her eyes. "I know, I'm done this time, I mean it." "Good." He offered her a small, encouraging smile. "Get some rest, we'll talk tomorrow." After he left, Sarah locked the door and leaned against it, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. She had gone from being trapped in an abusive relationship to being rescued by a wealthy stranger who had given her an apartment without asking for anything in return. It felt like something out of a movie, too good to be true, and yet here she was. She took a long, hot shower, washing away the blood and tears and rain, and found a plush bathrobe hanging on the back of the bathroom door. The bedroom had a king-sized bed with the softest sheets she had ever felt, and despite her racing thoughts, exhaustion pulled her under almost as soon as her head hit the pillow. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and spent several confused seconds trying to remember where she was before the events of the previous night came flooding back. She checked her phone and found 17 missed calls from Marcus, and a string of text messages that swung wildly between apologetic and threatening. She blocked his number with shaking hands, then called her boss at the art gallery where she worked to explain that she was sick and would not be coming in. She was making coffee in the beautiful modern kitchen when her phone rang with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Sarah." "It's Winston. How are you feeling this morning?" His voice was warm and concerned, and something in her chest loosened slightly. "Better. Still processing everything, I think. Thank you again for last night. I'm glad I was there." There was a pause. "Listen, I know you probably need to retrieve your belongings from your ex's apartment, and I don't think you should do that alone. I'm free this afternoon if you want some backup." Sarah closed her eyes, relief flooding through her. She had been dreading the thought of facing Marcus again, of collecting her things while he either raged at her or tried to manipulate her into staying. "You don't have to do that. You've already done so much." "I want to help," Winston said simply. "What time works for you?" They arranged to meet at 3, and Sarah spent the morning mentally preparing herself for the confrontation. She made a list of the items she needed to get, trying to be strategic since she probably would not have much time before Marcus made the situation unbearable. Winston arrived at the apartment right on time, now dressed in jeans and a dark Henley that somehow made him look even more imposing than the suit had. He had brought coffee and pastries, and Sarah found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." She grabbed her keys, then paused. "Winston, why are you really doing all this? I keep waiting for the catch." He met her eyes steadily. "No catch. I built my business on the principle that people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Your ex violated that principle in the worst possible way. Consider this karma balancing the scales." The drive to Marcus's apartment building was tense, Sarah's anxiety increasing with every block. Winston seemed to sense her distress because he kept up a steady stream of conversation about neutral topics, telling her about a building renovation project that was going hilariously wrong, making her laugh despite herself. Marcus was home, of course, and his face darkened the moment he opened the door and saw Winston standing behind Sarah. "You've got to be kidding me. You brought your new boyfriend to rub in my face." "I'm here to collect my things," Sarah said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "This doesn't have to be a big scene, Marcus. Just let me get my stuff, and I'll be gone." "Everything in this apartment belongs to both of us," Marcus said stubbornly, blocking the doorway. "You don't get to just take whatever you want." Winston stepped forward slightly, his presence making Marcus shift uncomfortably. "Actually, legally speaking, personal items like clothing and documents belong to the individual who owns them. Sarah has every right to retrieve her possessions. You can either let her in peacefully, or we can involve the police and make this official. Your choice." Marcus's jaw clenched, but he stepped aside with ill grace. "Fine, take your stuff and get out, but don't come crying to me when your knight in shining armor gets bored of playing hero." Sarah moved quickly through the apartment, pulling clothes from the closet and drawers, grabbing her laptop and the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. Winston helped her carry boxes to his car, his solid presence making Marcus keep his distance even though she could feel her ex's angry stare boring into her back. "The painting," she said suddenly, remembering the landscape she had created last year, one of her best pieces. It was hanging in the living room and she hurried back to get it before Marcus could refuse. "You're not taking that," Marcus said, stepping in front of it. "That's mine. You gave it to me." "I lent it to you for the apartment," Sarah corrected, reaching for the frame. "It's my work, Marcus." "Let go." He held on stubbornly, and for a moment they were in a tug of war over the canvas. Then Winston was there, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Release the painting. Now." Something in Winston's tone made Marcus's hands drop, and Sarah quickly lifted the painting off the wall, clutching it protectively. They made it out of the apartment without further incident, though Marcus shouted threats and insults after them all the way down the hallway. In the car, Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool window, trying to steady her breathing. "I can't believe I wasted 3 years of my life with that man. How did I let it get so bad?" "Abusers are good at what they do," Winston said quietly. "They chip away at your self-worth until you forget who you were before them. But you got out, Sarah. That takes real strength." She looked at him, this unexpected guardian angel who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment. "Can I ask what you do?" "The business card you gave me just says Quad Holdings. I develop and manage commercial and residential properties," Winston explained. "Started with one small apartment building 12 years ago and built it into something much larger. Right now, I own about 30 properties across the city." Sarah did the math in her head and realized she was sitting next to someone who was likely worth tens of millions of dollars. "So you're not just being modest about being successful." "I've worked hard and been lucky in equal measure," he said with a slight smile. Money doesn't impress me much anymore, but people do. People who keep going even when life kicks them down. They stopped for an early dinner at a small Italian restaurant, and Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. Winston was easy to talk to, asking questions about her art and her dreams, listening with genuine interest when she explained that she wanted to open her own gallery someday, featuring emerging artists who could not afford the traditional gallery system. "What's stopping you?" Winston asked, twirling pasta on his fork. Sarah laughed without much humor. "Money, mostly, and confidence. Marcus always said my work was not good enough to sell, that I was fooling myself thinking I could make it as a real artist." "Marcus was an idiot," Winston said bluntly. "That painting you took today is incredible. You have real talent, Sarah." She felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, at the simple validation she had been starving for. "Thank you. That means a lot." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah settled into the apartment Winston had given her, and to her surprise, he never mentioned rent or asked when she was planning to leave. He called every few days to check on her, sometimes bringing takeout or coffee, always respectful of her space but clearly invested in her well-being. She found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit, caught between gratitude and a growing attraction that felt both wonderful and terrifying. Winston was everything Marcus was not. He was calm where Marcus had been volatile, supportive where Marcus had been critical, steady where Marcus had been unreliable. He made her laugh and challenged her opinions and listened when she talked. And he was unfailingly patient, never pushing for more than friendship, even though Sarah sometimes caught him looking at her with something warm and intent in his dark eyes. Sarah landed a better job at a prestigious gallery downtown, thanks in part to a glowing recommendation from a contact Winston connected her with, though he had done it subtly enough that she had not realized his involvement until later. She started painting again in the evenings, rediscovering the joy she had lost during her years with Marcus, filling canvases with bold colors and emotion. One evening about a month after their first meeting, Winston showed up at her door with Thai food and an unusual expression on his face, something between nervous and determined. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked immediately, letting him in. "Nothing's wrong, but I need to talk to you about something." He set the food on the counter and turned to face her, his hands in his pockets. "I know the timing might not be ideal, and I don't want you to feel pressured because of everything I've done to help you, but I can't keep pretending that I see you as just a friend." Sarah's heart started racing. "Winston, let me finish," he said gently. "From the moment I saw you in that diner, something shifted for me, and getting to know you these past few weeks has only made it stronger. You're talented and brave and kind, and I think about you constantly. I want to take you on a real date, Sarah. Not as your rescuer or your landlord or whatever else you might think I am, but as a man who is falling for you." She stared at him, joy and fear warring inside her. "I'm a mess, Winston. I'm still putting myself back together after Marcus. I don't know if I'm ready for something new." "I'm not asking you to be ready for a relationship," he said, stepping closer. "I'm asking you to be open to the possibility. Let me take you to dinner. Let me show you how you deserve to be treated. And if you decide it's not right, I'll respect that and we'll stay friends. But I had to tell you how I feel." Sarah looked up at him, at this incredible man who had changed her life in every possible way, and realized that somewhere along the way, her gratitude had transformed into something much deeper. She was falling for him too, had been fighting it because it seemed too fast, too much like a rebound, too good to be real. But Winston was real, and the way he looked at her made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced with Marcus. "Okay," she whispered. Yes. I would love to go on a date with you. The smile that broke across Winston's face was like the sun coming out, and he reached for her hand carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She laced her fingers through his instead, marveling at how right it felt. Their first official date was at a rooftop restaurant with a view of the city lights, and Winston was attentive and charming without being overbearing. He asked about her childhood and her dreams, shared stories about building his business from nothing, made her laugh until her sides hurt. When he walked her to her door at the end of the night, he kissed her cheek softly and said good night without expecting more, leaving her wanting him to stay even though she knew taking things slow was the smart choice. The next 3 months passed in a blur of happiness as Sarah rediscovered what healthy love looked like. Winston courted her properly, with flowers and thoughtful dates and long conversations that lasted until dawn. He supported her art without trying to control it, celebrated her successes, and held her through the occasional nightmare about Marcus that still woke her gasping. He introduced her to his sister and his business partners, integrated her into his life with the kind of openness that spoke of serious intentions. Sarah opened up in return, trusting him with her fears and insecurities, letting him see the parts of herself she had hidden from Marcus. Winston met her parents when they visited the city, winning them over immediately with his sincerity and his obvious devotion to their daughter. Her father pulled her aside and told her that Winston was a good man, the kind who would stand beside her through anything, and Sarah knew he was right. 6 months after their first meeting, Winston took Sarah to the building where his office was located, leading her up to the top floor she had never visited. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah gasped. The entire floor was an art gallery, beautifully lit and professionally designed, and every wall held one of her paintings. "What is this?" She breathed, walking slowly through the space, recognizing pieces she had created over the past months and a few older works she had not known Winston had acquired. Winston came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's yours, the whole floor. I've been working with a designer to convert it into a gallery space. The building's first floor has great foot traffic, and we can use this space for events and showings. You said you wanted to feature emerging artists who need a chance, so here it is. Your gallery, Sarah." She turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "Winston, this is too much. I can't accept something like this." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Consider it a business investment. I believe in you and your vision. And selfishly, I want to see you thrive. Watching you come back to life these past months has been the greatest privilege of my life." Sarah kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into it, and Winston held her like she was precious, like she was everything. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I am so completely in love with you." "Thank God," he murmured, kissing her again. "I've been in love with you since that night in the diner when you looked at me like I might actually be a good person. You saved me too, Sarah. I didn't realize how lonely I was until you filled all those empty spaces." They spent the next hour planning the gallery, Sarah's excitement building as she envisioned the possibilities. This was her dream, the one she had thought was lost forever during her years with Marcus, now being handed to her by a man who believed in her potential more than she believed in herself. The gallery opened 3 months later to rave reviews, with Sarah showcasing 5 emerging artists alongside her own work. Winston stood in the back during the opening night, watching Sarah glow as she talked to collectors and critics, pride written all over his face. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, mouthing "thank you," and he shook his head, mouthing back "all you." A year after they met, Winston proposed during a private dinner at the apartment where Sarah had first stayed, the place where she had begun to heal and rebuild her life. He got down on one knee with a ring that was elegant and understated, perfect for her style, and asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. Sarah said yes before he could finish the question, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by how completely her life had transformed. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony surrounded by family and close friends, exchanging vows they had written themselves. Sarah promised to love Winston with the fierce, unshakable love he had shown her from the very beginning. Winston promised to stand beside her through every challenge, to lift her up when she fell, to never let her forget her own worth. There was not a dry eye in the room when they kissed, sealing a partnership that had been forged in crisis and strengthened by genuine connection. 2 years into their marriage, Sarah's gallery had expanded to 3 locations, featuring dozens of artists who had been overlooked by the traditional art world. She had found her calling in nurturing talent and giving people the chances they deserved, and Winston supported every venture with enthusiasm and business savvy. They made a formidable team, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses, pushing each other to be better while providing a safe place to land when things got hard. They bought a house in the suburbs with space for a studio and a yard, somewhere they could build a life together away from the city noise. Sarah painted every day, her work evolving and maturing, galleries across the country requesting her pieces. But her favorite creation was the portrait she made of Winston, capturing the strength and gentleness in his face, the intelligence in his eyes, the love that had saved her. Winston hung it in his office where everyone could see it, telling anyone who asked that it was painted by his wife, the most talented artist he knew. He never tired of supporting her, of bragging about her accomplishments, of coming home to find her covered in paint and beautifully disheveled from a productive day in the studio. 3 years after their wedding, Sarah discovered she was pregnant, and Winston cried when she told him, his hands shaking as he held the positive test. They prepared for parenthood together, Winston reading every parenting book he could find while Sarah decorated the nursery with whimsical murals of forests and stars. Their daughter was born on a snowy January morning, tiny and perfect, with Winston's dark hair and Sarah's green eyes. They named her Grace, because that was what had brought them together, the grace of being in the right place at the right moment, the grace of second chances and new beginnings. Winston held his daughter with the same careful reverence he had always shown Sarah, this man who had once been a stranger in a diner and had become her entire world. Sarah watched her husband rock their baby girl while humming softly, and she thought about that terrified woman who had stumbled into a diner with a split lip and no hope, who had been saved by a man who refused to look away from someone else's suffering. She thought about how close she had come to staying trapped in that toxic relationship, believing Marcus's lies that she was not worth more. And she thought about Winston, who had not just rescued her but had stayed, who had shown her what real love looked like every single day since. 2 years later, they had a son named James, completing their family in a way that felt both surprising and inevitable. The house was full of laughter and chaos, paintings and toys scattered everywhere, a beautiful mess that reflected the life they had built together. Sarah's parents visited often, doting on their grandchildren and grateful beyond words that their daughter had found a partner who cherished her. Winston's business continued to thrive, but he made sure to be present for every important moment, coaching James's little league team and attending Grace's dance recitals, putting family above everything else because he understood what truly mattered. He and Sarah still had date nights every week, keeping their connection strong even as their lives grew busier and more complicated. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they returned to the diner where they had first met, bringing Grace and James along. The same waitress was working, and she remembered them immediately, her face lighting up when she saw Sarah happy and healthy, holding hands with the man who had defended her all those years ago. "I think about you too sometimes," the waitress said, refilling their coffee. "Wondered if things worked out. Looks like they did." "Better than I ever imagined," Sarah said, squeezing Winston's hand under the table while their children colored on paper placemats. After the waitress walked away, Winston leaned over and kissed Sarah's temple. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, for trusting me when you had every reason not to trust anyone." "Thank you for seeing me," Sarah replied softly, "for stepping in when you could have just walked away, for loving me enough to stay." Grace looked up from her coloring. "Daddy, why are you and Mommy being mushy?" Winston laughed and scooped his daughter into his lap. "Because your mom is pretty amazing, and I like reminding her of that." "Mommy is the best," James agreed loyally, earning himself a kiss on the head from Sarah. They finished their meal surrounded by the warmth of family. The booth in that dingy diner somehow sacred because of what had started there. Sarah looked around at her children, at her husband, at the life she had built from the ashes of her worst night, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the millionaire who had saved her from her toxic ex and had never let her go. 10 years after that fateful night, Sarah's gallery was internationally recognized, her own artwork hanging in museums, her reputation as both an artist and a curator firmly established. Winston had expanded his business into sustainable housing developments, creating affordable homes for families who needed them. His success, allowing him to give back in meaningful ways. Their children were thriving, Grace showing early signs of artistic talent while James was fascinated by how buildings were constructed, already following in his father's footsteps. But despite all their professional accomplishments and material success, what mattered most to both of them was the family they had created, the home they had built together on a foundation of respect and trust and genuine love. They still had challenges and disagreements, moments of stress and frustration, because no relationship was perfect. But they faced everything together, committed to working through problems instead of running from them, modeling healthy love for their children. Sarah sometimes thought about Marcus, wondered if he had ever changed, or if he was still hurting people with his anger and control. She hoped he had found help, but mostly she was just grateful she had escaped before it was too late, before his abuse had destroyed the parts of herself she had managed to protect. And she was grateful for Winston, who had shown her that strength did not mean domination, that love did not have to hurt, that partnership meant lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. Winston never took credit for saving Sarah, always insisting that she had saved herself by finding the courage to leave. But Sarah knew the truth, knew that his intervention had changed the trajectory of her entire life, that without him she might have gone back to Marcus like she had so many times before. Winston had been her catalyst, the person who had believed in her worth when she had forgotten it herself. On their 10th anniversary, Winston surprised Sarah with a weekend away, just the two of them while his sister watched the kids. They went to a coastal town with art galleries and seafood restaurants, spending their days exploring, and their nights wrapped around each other in a beachfront hotel, reconnecting as partners and lovers without the demands of parenthood and careers. On their last evening, they walked along the beach at sunset, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples that made Sarah's artist heart sing. Winston stopped and pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You ever think about that night?" He asked quietly. "About how differently things could have gone." "All the time," Sarah admitted. "I think about what would have happened if you had not been there, if you had not cared enough to get involved. I think about how close I came to losing myself completely." "I was just supposed to get coffee," Winston said, a smile in his voice. "Had no idea I was going to meet the love of my life." Sarah turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her everything. "Best coffee run ever." He kissed her as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Sarah felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt on their first real kiss, the magic between them undimmed by time or familiarity. This was the love she had dreamed of as a girl, the partnership she had stopped believing existed during her time with Marcus. And it was real, solid, tested by time and strengthened by commitment. They returned home to their children's enthusiastic welcome, Grace and James talking over each other to tell them about everything that had happened while they were gone. Winston scooped them both up with ease, making them shriek with laughter, while Sarah watched with a full heart. This was her family, her life, her happiness, all of it possible because one man had refused to walk away when she needed help most. Years continued to pass in a blur of school plays and gallery openings, family vacations and quiet evenings at home. Sarah and Winston grew older together, their love deepening and evolving, weathering every storm that came their way. They taught their children about respect and kindness, about standing up for people who needed help, about the importance of choosing partners who brought out the best in you instead of the worst. When Grace was 15, she asked her mother about the painting that hung in their hallway, the one of the diner at night with a man and woman visible through the window. Sarah had painted it years ago, a tribute to the place where her real life had begun, and she had never told her daughter the full story behind it. So Sarah sat Grace down and told her everything about Marcus and the abuse, about running to that diner, about Winston stepping in to save her. Grace listened with wide eyes, tears streaming down her face by the end, and then she hugged her mother fiercely. "I'm so glad Dad found you," Grace whispered. "I'm so glad you got away." "Me too, sweetheart," Sarah said, holding her daughter tight. "And I want you to remember this story if you ever find yourself in a relationship that makes you feel small or scared. You deserve someone who lifts you up, who respects you, who would never even think of hurting you. Don't settle for less." Grace pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Is that why you and Dad are always so affectionate? Because you know what it's like when it's wrong?" "Partly," Sarah agreed. "But mostly because your father is genuinely wonderful, and I never want to take that for granted. Every day with him is a gift." Winston appeared in the doorway then, having heard the last part of their conversation. "Are you telling our daughter embarrassing stories about how much you love me?" "The most embarrassing ones," Sarah confirmed with a grin, and Grace laughed, the heavy moment breaking into something lighter. That night, after the kids were in bed, Sarah found Winston in his study, reviewing plans for a new affordable housing development. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Thank you for being exactly who you are," she said softly. "For being the kind of man our daughter can use as a standard for what she deserves." Winston turned and pulled her into his lap, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart after someone else broke it, for building this incredible life with me, for being my partner in everything." They sat together in comfortable silence, no words needed after so many years of understanding each other perfectly. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere out there, other people were having their worst nights, their moments of crisis. Sarah hoped they would find their own rescuers, their own Winstons, people who would step in and stay and love them back to wholeness. But mostly she was just grateful for her own happy ending, for the millionaire who had saved her from her toxic ex in a dingy diner and had never let her go, not for a single day since. Their love story had started with fear and pain, but it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, proof that redemption was possible, that second chances were real, that true love existed outside of fairy tales. Winston Quade had been her rescuer, her partner, her greatest love, and the father of her children. And Sarah Vaughn, once broken and terrified, had become an accomplished artist, a successful businesswoman, and most importantly, a woman who knew her own worth and never doubted it again. Together they had built something extraordinary from the wreckage of her worst night, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of love. Their story was not perfect, because real life never was, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was more than enough. And every time Sarah looked at her husband, she saw not just the man who had saved her, but the man who had chosen to stay, day after day, year after year, loving her through every triumph and challenge with unwavering devotion. That was the real miracle, the true happy ending. Not the dramatic rescue, but the quiet choice to keep choosing each other forever.